On this Tuesday night, rising vaccinations and questions about relaxing restrictions. What will fully immunized Canadians be allowed to do?
If we don't provide people with this guidance, they're going to start to make up their own rules.
Plus, a First Nation in the midst of a COVID crisis pleads for help. Turmoil within the Green Party, the challenge to Annamie Paul's leadership. The mess in the senior ranks of Canada's military. What's the Defence Minister going to do about it?
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a milestone for Canada on COVID-19 vaccinations and case counts. The caseload is now the lowest it has been since the end of summer 2020. There are fewer than 15,000 active cases right now, and just over 800 new cases were reported in the past 24 hours in Canada. It is a massive drop from just over 2 months ago, when 9,200 daily new cases were being reported. And Canada has hit a new mark on vaccinations. According to Our World in Data, Canada now leads the world, having the largest share of the population, 65%, with at least one vaccine dose. That's ahead of Israel and the UK. We're still far behind, though, on second doses. That sits at just 13%, but it is climbing as more vaccine doses arrive in the country. We are on track for a 2-dose summer. As Eric Sorensen explains, the federal government is now under pressure to give Canadians clear guidance about what we can do when we're fully vaccinated.
It's another wave, not a pandemic wave, but a public health wave. Ontarians who've had one vaccine dose are lining up in astonishing numbers for their second dose at this pop-up clinic.
It's important for me to get the second vaccine. I want to be able to see my family. I want to protect my family.
Cheers.
Life is beginning to return to normal. An update on international travel and border restrictions is expected within days.
We hope and believe these measures can evolve in a phased, appropriate way over the next number of weeks.
But as Canadians become fully vaccinated, what else will change? Critics say the government is not providing clear guidelines.
If I'm vaccinated fully, can I be with other people who are fully vaccinated? The answer to that is yes. I think this kind of guidance is extremely important to give people an idea of what's safe and what can be done.
In Israel, those who are fully vaccinated get a special pass so they can attend concerts. In the U.S., the Center for Disease Control has issued guidelines for the fully vaccinated to dispense with masks and distancing. In this country, for now, public health officials suggest Canadians assess their own risk, though new guidelines are being looked at.
We are discussing this with the provinces, and I think that, we will be providing that kind of tool, if you like.
If we don't provide people with this guidance, they're going to start to make up their own rules.
In Calgary, for example, the annual Stampede is considering a vaccine pass for events with large crowds.
When it comes to certain venues, we are exploring the idea of proof of vaccination or rapid testing.
Canada has become a world leader in administering first doses of vaccine, and guidelines for what comes next should keep pace with that, says this doctor.
So we need to recognize that effectiveness by creating guidance to show people that when you get vaccinated, your life will change, and that's an incentive.
Canada may need some incentive as the rate of first doses begins to slow. In France, they've come up with this. A promotion promising the vaccinated freedom from pandemic restrictions. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Canada has relied completely on other countries to produce and supply us with vaccines. Many of them come from a Pfizer plant in Belgium. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau got a tour of that plant today, and Abigail Bimman was there too. Abigail?
Donna, the majority of doses in Canadian arms come from Pfizer, and 11.6 million of them were made here at this Belgian plant.
Pfizer has been just so solid as a partner.
The Prime Minister has described Pfizer as the reliable workhorse of Canada's vaccine herd. Tuesday, he had a chance to see how they're made and thank the people who make them.
It's a very Canadian thing to say thank you, so I absolutely want to say
much appreciated.
Plants like this push out supply as fast as possible, but the need is overwhelming. The World Health Organization pegs it at 11 billion doses. There's a debate raging about whether to waive the drug maker's intellectual property patents to make vaccines in more places faster. The U.S. now supports the move. Some countries with big pharmaceutical presences like Germany and the UK do not.
IP rights are the reward for innovation and breakthrough research. And the IP rights themselves do not tell the whole story of how to produce successfully a vaccine.
Europe has put forward an alternative plan that includes compulsory licensing, which would get around the waiver but compensate the drug maker.
Just on Thursday last week, I think the debate moved a little bit further, with most members agreeing to engage in text-based negotiations.
The Prime Minister has been asked many times, but still won't take a side.
This is a complex situation. It's not just a finding a single silver bullet.
We're a minority government. We are heading into an election. Opposition parties may grab hold of this and say, geez, this is going to be bad for investment. And the government, I think, is just not wanting to engage and take a stance that I think most Canadians would support and would like them to take.
The Prime Minister wraps up his overseas trip. Before most people can travel easily again, the question of vaccine passports still needs to be resolved. Here in Europe, there's a plan in place. Canada doesn't yet have one. Donna?
All right, Abigail Bimman in Belgium tonight. Thanks. There are places in this country still struggling to cope with cases of COVID-19. The Kashechewan First Nation in Ontario is one of them. It is in crisis tonight. There are 216 active cases of COVID-19 there in a community of just 1,800 people. Kashechewan is near James Bay, almost 1,000 kilometers north of Toronto. It's remote. There are no roads in or out, so helping those who are ill is difficult. 14 people have been airlifted to hospital. Mike Le Couteur has been speaking to the chief in Kashechewan.
I never seen so scary points in my life since I became a chief.
Leo Friday has been chief of Kashechewan First Nation for the last 6 years. His community experiences yearly flooding and struggles with chronic housing shortages. But this COVID-19 outbreak has shaken him.
This is the first time that I encounter some kind of a dangerous feeling for my people.
More than 200 members of his community have COVID-19. A number of them had to be airlifted out of the community for medical help. Now, it's unclear how the virus got into the remote region, but cramped living conditions fueled the spread.
We have 15 to 20 people living in overcrowded homes. Already people have compromised health and lung problems from black mold, and now COVID is moving through children and babies.
Many of those children were too young to be vaccinated. The federal government has sent a team of 15 Canadian Rangers to assess the situation and is ready to move more resources to the region.
This is a minute-to-minute discussion with public safety, but prepared to ramp up as well as the community needs it and as they navigate sort of this critical 14-day period.
Isolation tents and temporary housing structures will be going up soon, but there's an urgent need for food and other supplies. Some groups, like the Mennonite Central Committee, have stepped up and chartered private supply planes.
The 6,500 pounds of food, that was more than $10,000 and that was reasonable.
The chief of Kashechewan First Nation says the immediate help is welcomed, but he wants a long-term solution to the housing crisis so something like this doesn't happen again. Donna?
All right, Mike Le Couteur reporting from Ottawa tonight. Thanks. The Ontario government is committing $10 million over 3 years to identify and commemorate burial sites at Indigenous residential schools across that province. The first step will be gathering information from survivors and then forensic investigations of at least 12 separate residential school sites. Indigenous leaders have praised the provincial government's commitment, but said the Catholic Church also needs to acknowledge its role.
I believe that the Catholic Church needs to come forward and make efforts to bring the Pope to Canada for a formal apology to all First Nations across Canada. For us, it's genocide. That's what took place. They wanted to wipe us out.
Ontario's announcement is the first major provincial commitment following the discovery of what are believed to be the unmarked graves of 215 people on the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. Some members of the Green Party of Canada are trying to remove Annamie Paul as leader. The party's federal council has scheduled a vote for tonight that, if successful, could kickstart the removal process. Less than a week ago, MP Jenica Atwin abandoned the Green Party and crossed the floor to join the Liberals. She said months of internal strife over the party's stance on the conflict in the Middle East was a distraction. Annamie Paul was elected leader in October and is reportedly rejecting calls to resign, saying she is not going anywhere. There's some breaking news in the Middle East. Israel has launched airstrikes on Gaza, ending the ceasefire reached 26 days ago. The Israeli Defense Force claims the strikes are retaliation for what they call incendiary balloons launched from Gaza, which set fires on Israeli land. Earlier today, hundreds of Israeli ultra-nationalists, some chanting death to Arabs, paraded through East Jerusalem. Israel's newly appointed Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, permitted the march, and it infuriated Palestinians. Israel claims today's strikes on Gaza hit Hamas targets and says it is prepared for a resumption of hostilities. Cascading consequences, the crisis in Canada's military. Coming up, the pressure on the Defence Minister to fix it. The questions keep mounting about the leadership of the Canadian Armed Forces. The military has now lost its two top commanders, all of it a cascading effect after Global News first broke the story of alleged sexual misconduct in the military. It's hard to keep track of who has been shuffled out. Lieutenant General Mike Rouleau, who was second in command, is the latest to step aside. He went golfing with General Jonathan Vance, who is under investigation for sexual misconduct. At least 8 other men in the senior ranks are being investigated too, or have stepped aside or been removed, including Major General Danny Fortin, who the Prime Minister had put in charge of vaccine logistics. Mercedes Stephenson, our Ottawa bureau chief, is with me. Mercedes, start with Fortin. He is not happy about being yanked from the job and he's pushing back. What's he alleging?
Donna, Danny Fortin has launched a court challenge to the government's decision to remove him from his job as the head of Canada's vaccine rollout. In documents filed with the federal court, Fortin makes some incendiary allegations against the Prime Minister, the Minister of Health, and the Minister of National Defence, saying the decision to get rid of him was politically motivated and overrode the military chain of command without him having the ability to defend himself before having his reputation destroyed. The court documents reveal a behind-the-scenes look at what Fortin says happened in the days leading up to his removal, including an allegation that the head of the Public Health Agency of Canada warned Fortin to prepare himself for the moment that they determine you need to be let go and to keep your bags packed. Fortin says comments like that one where he was told, and another where he was told that the political calculus had changed, prove the whole thing was politically motivated and amounted to what he calls inappropriate political interference by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and members of his cabinet, who Fortin says got rid of him for their own personal and political gain, overriding the chief of the defense staff and leaving out key context about the allegation he was facing. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, when asked about it today, would only say it's before the courts.
So, Mercedes, where does all of this leave the government and the military? How do you move forward when you keep losing top people?
Well, that's a great question and a tough one. Senior military leaders don't appear to respect the defense minister. They're not listening to him, and they certainly don't seem to get it based on that infamous golf game. This is now becoming an issue for the government of civilian control over the military. With the government seeming to have lost control on this file, it's increasingly becoming an issue, and it blew up today in question period. Listen to this.
The Canadian Armed Forces is literally falling apart before our eyes. When will the Prime Minister fire his incompetent minister?
We know that we have a lot more work to do to making sure that we create an inclusive environment in the Canadian Armed Forces, and we will get it done.
And then there's the question of where Minister Sajjan is. He hasn't come out other than question period to give interviews or public statements. And this is all very complicated for the military too, Donna. They continue to lose key leaders in an institution that is supposed to be protecting the country and our national security. It's hard to do that when you're putting out daily fires, though, dealing with ongoing bad decisions and not just historic allegations. Donna?
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thank you. Wolf warrior diplomacy still ahead. China's approach to critics at home and abroad.
You're watching Global National.
U.S. President Joe Biden touched down in Switzerland today ahead of his summit meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva. It will be their first face-to-face since Biden took office, and Biden brings nearly half a century of foreign policy experience with him. He has said he thinks Putin is a killer. He's also called him a worthy adversary and says he's not looking for conflict. The last 4 U.S. presidents have sought to re-engage with Russia with limited success. As the case of the 2 Michaels detained in China drags on, the Chinese government is being looked at with some trepidation. That anxiety is rooted in Beijing's growing assertiveness and its enigmatic leader, Xi Jinping. When Xi first took office back in 2012, the West hoped for a new era of reform and opening. Instead, as Jeff Semple reports, the opposite has taken hold.
When Xi Jinping was elected Chinese president in 2012, Western observers were filled with hope. He promised to liberate China's way of thinking, and many believed he would become a great reformer, not a wolf warrior. Xi's combative foreign policy style is nicknamed Wolf Warrior Diplomacy after the hit Chinese movie Wolf Warrior 2. A brutal blockbuster about a Chinese soldier battling evil American mercenaries.
Xi Jinping has been particularly successful and skillful in playing the political game, in aiming at his political opponents.
President Xi is cracking down on dissent both at home and abroad, arresting the 2 Michaels and temporarily blocking billions of dollars in Canadian exports. Prime Minister Trudeau has tried to walk a fine line, talking tough at times, but also unwilling to take any real action against China.
We've made it very clear to ourselves that the soft approach does not work.
But for a lesson in what can happen when a mid-sized country challenges China, one need only look down under.
China's trade sanctions have hit industry after industry.
Australia has become a political punching bag. Beijing banning a long list of Aussie exports after Australia's Prime Minister called for an inquiry into the origin of COVID-19.
People have learnt from the Australian experience that it's unwise to go as a single nation and criticize China because you'll be picked off.
So Western allies are now locking arms. This month's G7 and NATO summits took aim at Beijing, calling China a systemic security risk.
As partners, we must stand strong and united.
But already, cracks are showing. Germany and other European nations are downplaying the rhetoric. The Chinese market is crucial to German automakers. Beijing, meanwhile, is fast building its own alliances, with Russia, among others, and accused NATO of slander. Facing growing opposition from the West, China's wolf warrior president is showing his teeth. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
That's Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is Humber River in Toronto. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.